Good morning, Mo. How are you today? Can you hear me okay? Can you see everything all right? Okay, hopefully it gets a little bit better soon. Usually in the morning, I've got good internet upload speeds. That's why I chose this time to do these streams. I hope it gets better for you. If it's not better in a minute or two, let me know. So today we're going to draw a little koala. We're just going to draw the face today. Another day with a slightly bigger piece of paper, I'll do a full-size koala. But today we're just going to draw the face. I'm just going to use some pencil today. And we'll see how we go. What's the weather like at your part of the world, Mo? Are you guys in springtime now? I'm just roughly marking in the shapes that I want to put in my drawing. I've got just a few basic areas I need to fill in. We've basically got to draw the face, which is some eyes, a nose, a mouth, and we can see one ear. So it's going to be quite a simple drawing. Now we have options here as to how complicated or detailed we want to make it. The time will limit how much detail I can put into it. And the intention of these isn't really to show off what I can do, but simply to share my experience and be able to give you guys some things. Hello, Em. How are you this morning? How is the weather in Italy today? Mornings are cooling down here. The leaves are all starting to turn different colours, and we've been having to use our heater of a morning to warm the place up a bit. I guess you guys are starting to warm up a bit and take some clothes off, whereas we're starting to put some more on. We're drawing a koala today. Oh, very good, very good. I'm very fortunate that I seem to always have good health, and I'm very, very lucky in that way. I know not everybody has that, but feeling very good this morning. Hi, Big Hugh Art. How are you this morning? Thank you very much for stopping by. Always welcome everybody to come in and have a chat. I'll admit I was a little bit nervous the first time I went live. I wasn't sure what would happen. I wasn't even sure how the technology would work or what would go on, but it all worked out okay. We're going to make some mistakes, I know that, but along the way I'll learn some things, and hopefully I can make these streams get better and better. So I'm glad to see you guys have stopped in to say hello. At some point I'll try to get some sort of a regular schedule as to how I do these things. At the moment I've just got to fit it in around a few other things that are going on. So There's not going to be any set days that I'm going to stream, but I'll just drop something on Instagram to let people know. So I'm going to draw this koala in pencil this morning. I don't know if you guys have seen me do any pencil drawings yet. I haven't done much with just normal pencils for a while, so I thought I might do that today. I'm just going to build up a few little layers here. So we've got this koala. So we're just going to map out all of these nice little areas on his face, the main things, and I'm just measuring the spaces between them with my eye, but I can also measure those with my pencil, just so that I get the right proportions to make it look realistic. Now, there's different ways that you can measure things. I'm not going to demonstrate all of those today, but I might do a few more videos going forward to demonstrate some of the other ways that you can measure proportions, just to help folks that might not have much experience in it to understand it. So let me know, have any of you guys ever seen a koala in real life? I'm using a 2B pencil here at the moment. Just want to put down a few layers, a few light layers of graphite. We'll do a little bit of blending as we go, and then we'll start to build up a little bit of texture later in the drawing. The early part of the drawing is really just all about finding the spaces and then just starting to put a little bit of shading in, just to understand where the tones will sit, the values will sit in the drawing. At the very beginning, I don't worry too much about which direction my shading goes in. If I was going to draw this as extremely realistically as possible, I would take care with that right from the get-go. But when I'm going to do just a bit of a loose drawing, I don't worry too much about that. As always, if you see something you don't like, rub it out. I've been shading pretty roughly so far, but we can start to build a little bit more finesse into how we're doing the shading as we build the layers up. We want to put in some lines. Lines give a drawing a lot of energy, and the direction that your lines go in will change how that energy is represented. If you draw lines across the page, that will calm your drawing down. That will make it stable. It will make it very calming and peaceful. If you draw your lines up and down, that will give it a more imposing and powerful feel. A lot of vertical lines, an indication of power and strength and influence and those sorts of things. That will help to give your drawing those kind of influence. But if you draw a lot of lines on a diagonal, it gives your drawing more energy. And that's often what I want to do. In this drawing and in most drawings, I'm going to draw lines in all directions. But whatever is predominant, those are the lines that are going to have the most impact. If we want a section to be a little bit calm because it's getting too noisy, we can use some horizontal shading. If we want to get some movement and we want to draw somebody's eye up the page, we can put some vertical shading in. But if we want to just give the feeling of life and energy, then we can just use a lot of short diagonals. We can use long diagonals too if we want to. But at this stage, I'm just going to put in lots of little short diagonal lines. It'll start building up the appearance of fur, and it's going to give us a little bit of energy and that little bit of life in our drawing. I hope I'm not boring you guys with all of my talk about lines and drawings. If there's anything you want me to talk about in particular, don't be afraid to ask a question. Could be a question about art, could be a question about my drawing, or a question about anything else that you like. It's quite early for me this morning. I have to get up at 4:30 to do these streams, just to get at a convenient time for me. How about for you guys? What time of day is it where you live? I'm gradually getting to know the international time zones a little bit better, but I don't know where all you guys live, so. Build up lots of little lines, starting to add some darkness, add some tone. Now I want to put a little bit of detail around the eyes. I don't want them to get lost in my drawing at this point, and I just need to get the basic shapes drawn in. Now in this particular photo, I can see one eye quite clearly, but I can't see the other eye quite clearly. So I'm going to mimic that. Koala's eyes aren't too different from a human being's eyes, really, in their shape. And that's true of a lot of animal eyes. So if you're going to draw some animals, you'll get better at drawing people. If you're good at drawing people, well, you find that it's not too hard to change over and be able to draw animals at the same time. The same skill set is needed. It's quite just a question of building up patiently the ability to draw what you see. If you observe things and look at things, you'll be able to see where the lines are and where the shapes are. Shapes and lines are really important, and that's the key for a beginner drawer. To be able to start seeing shapes and lines. Then later, you can see more detail. You'll see more shapes and more lines, and that's where the really finesse drawings come from. Just being able to see the things that you probably can't even see when you first start out. It's 1:15 in Iowa. Well, I hope you're having a good day there, Mo. Now, I'm not that familiar with the geography of the US to some extent. I kind of know, not from any personal experience, I've never been there, but I kind of know that there's many states in America, and I don't know which one Iowa is. I have a feeling it's somewhere in the middle, and it's somewhere, yeah, I'm a bit lost. I would need to look at a map. Maybe you can tell me. What's nearby? What would be a major landmark that I might have heard of in Australia? You'll notice I never really stay in one spot for very long in my drawing. I keep moving around all the time. And that's because my drawing as a whole is important to me. And it's kind of the way my brain works. Some people like to just work in one area and try to finish that area and then move on. But I find that I get a much better result if I work all over the drawing at once and just keep building up layers and layers. And that way I'm not too far advanced by the time I can see how the whole drawing is going to look. And then I'm able to change things. If I don't like the direction that one particular part of the drawing is going in, I can rub it out and start again. All these lines are quite light right now, and I could rub anything out that I want to. I'm not stuck, and I don't have to keep anything if I don't want to. And that's how I like to work. I like to give myself plenty of room so that the drawing itself can evolve as it goes. Because sometimes things don't work out the first time. Sometimes things take a few goes to figure out exactly what you want or how you want the drawing to work. So we keep building up these layers. I'm still using the 2B pencil. At some point I'll change. I'll go for a 4B or a 6B. I think I've got up to 8Bs here with me. Excuse me. And we'll keep building up those layers. With graphite, we're limited in how dark we can go. I will have a charcoal pencil nearby that I can use if I need to. And charcoal and graphite will work well together. I don't like the shape of this nose, so I'm just going to move it. It's very easy. Just going to reshape this nose. As I first start out with these drawings, I usually would just have vague shapes in place. And then as we go further and further, we'll get a little bit more detail and we'll refine it. And that's how I like to work. I just like to build it up in layer after layer. And I use mediums that are forgiving for that sort of work. If we use something like an ink drawing, it's not as forgiving because we have to get a lot of these layers correct right from the get-go. In that case, I would sit and make a really detailed underdrawing and then come over the top with the ink if that's what I wanted to do. I may even use something like the grid method to mark out where all of the features go. If I wanted to make a really detailed portrait of someone, particularly if it's someone I haven't seen much or met before, I'm just getting to know their face, I might use that method to help me understand what all the details are and how it all works. There's a few simple little dark lines here that I can see. I'm just going to put those in. That helps me later. Everything that you can see in a drawing is something you can measure off. If you can see a dark line in one place, well, you can measure the distance from that dark line to something else or anything else. It's not just about measuring the positive shapes that you can see easily. It's also about measuring the negative spaces in between things. So there's a space, for example, between this eye and this nose here. There's a space from the edge of the nose to the edge of the face. There's a space from this line here down to the bottom of the mouth. All of these things have a shape which you can look at, and all of these things will have a size that you can help yourself to measure with. You can measure just with your eye. You can measure using the pencil. For example, if I wanted to know how long my nose is, I can use the pencil tip and then use my thumb to get a measurement. And then if I see another section that's the same length, I can use that in my drawing. I can't demonstrate it here because I don't have room, but you can use the same technique by holding your arm out at length to capture distances in landscapes and things that are far away. And that can help you. If you're just drawing from a photo, you could use a ruler. But if you're measuring out in the real world, you actually need to be able to measure things with your eye. And so these are some tips and some tricks that you can use. And I talked a little bit about some of those in some of my other videos, but it doesn't matter which method you use. The key is that you find a method that works for you and that you're able to capture the information that you want. Good morning, Prudence. I don't actually have a koala hanging out with me. I do have a photo here this morning. I will actually just show it to you guys quickly. So that will be my reference photo. So we're just working on a koala's face this morning. So as you can see, we've just marked out some of the basic lines and the basic areas, and we're just building up some more layers. So no live koala in the studio this morning, I'm afraid. I'll try and organise one another day if possible. I do have one wild animal with me, which I'll share with you if the camera can focus on it. So it's my Hug an Elephant kit. I always keep this in the studio just for emergencies in case I'm having a bad day and I need to have a hug. So that's the only wild animal that I have present with me this morning. And hopefully the elephant's only going to use their powers for good, not for evil. So we look for some of the areas that are going to be darkest, and I start to mark those in. I'm not going to go very dark with this pencil because I want to save those areas for a darker pencil. So we're just going to build up lots of little areas of shading now, using energetic lines in the directions that we want to go. When I'm using a pencil like this, the whiter the paper is the lightest tone that we can end up with. So I've got to be reasonably careful to leave as much of the paper white as possible in the parts where the whitest sections are going to be. So I've got some really white sections around these eyes, so I'm going to leave those completely clear for the moment. But at the same time, I always like to fill in the paper. I don't like to leave big areas of white glaring back at me, because that makes it harder for me to judge the other tones in the drawing. So always so we don't use the photo as an exact replica, and it depends on the drawing. Basically, every drawing is a little bit different. It depends on what we're doing. For example, if we're doing a commission for somebody and they've asked for a realistic drawing of their portrait or their pet or their whatever, then the photo becomes the the anchor for everything else because it's got all the details in it. We can't draw from imagination if we're trying to replicate something that we can't see from any other format. It's great to see a person or a thing in real life because you get depth, which you don't ever get in a photograph. A photograph will capture lighting and shading and some things, but it doesn't capture depth very well. And that leaves, particularly for a beginner, it's very difficult for you to add the depth in because you don't necessarily know how to do that until you've seen it in the real life. So I certainly recommend that we don't ever just draw from photographs, that at some point we go outside and we draw something, or you just take some object in your house and draw it. If you have some fruit lying around, put a piece of fruit under a light to give it strong lighting, and then sit down and draw that. And that can be a great way to learn, and it's one of the reasons why I pick on fruit for beginner drawing lessons, because they're interesting shapes. They usually will have interesting characteristics and will reflect. And then you get to choose how much level of detail you want to put into things. So a beginner can stop once they've got the basic shapes in place, and they can be satisfied that they've got something good done. And as you get better at it, you can return to it, and then you can add more depth and more detail and put in more things. But that's a bit where your artistic vision comes into it, isn't it? Being able to choose the things that are important to you in your reference. And when you're doing artwork for yourself, you can choose how much of your own imagination goes into it. So we've got the basic shapes mapped out. Now, what's difficult for me to do in some of these situations where we're drawing live, but I would often do in real life, is I stop and I get away from the drawing. And it doesn't have to be for long. It might be for 20 seconds. It might be just walking into the next room, turning around and walking back. But it just takes the whole thing away from my eyes for a minute. It lets me have a rest visually. And then when I come back to it, I can see it differently. I can see the things that aren't quite right. I can see the things that aren't where they need to be. I can see mistakes that I've made or things that I need to move. And before we go too far in the drawing, while things are still light and I can easily erase them, that's what I will do. Now, I'm going to turn this drawing upside down for a minute just to demonstrate something. So bear with me. I hope this doesn't cause any motion sickness for anyone. So now that I've turned it upside down, that gives me the same effect as if I were to go away from the drawing and come back and look at it with fresh eyes. So this gives me the ability to see, is everything lined up? And I can use any object nearby that I might have to help me understand that. For example, I've got this paintbrush, which will serve as a ruler. So I can measure and I can see if my lines are straight. I can see if the eyes are sitting on a plane. I can measure a line between the center of the nose and the center of the eyes, and I can see whether I've got that correct or not. We can measure different elements and just have a quick look. And I can see that most things are sitting where I want them to be. There's nothing there that I particularly have a concern over. This line here is a little bit out of shape. I could move that a bit. Probably the top of the nose could come around a little bit. But these are minor things and nothing that's going to be too disturbing for completing this painting or drawing. So now I'm going to change pencils. So that was the 2B that I was just using. Now I'm going to go for a 6B. Just quickly need to sharpen it. .6B is probably the most common pencil that I use and will go through. Thank you very much, Mo. I appreciate your comments. You've always been very kind to me and very supportive, and I value that. Thank you very much. So the 6B pencil is softer than the 2B pencil. And so for a beginner who may not know these things, pencils come in a few different designations. They can be H, they can be F, or they can be B. And those letters relate to the hardness and the softness of a pencil. So a H pencil is quite hard. I don't really use H pencils very much. A H pencil would be used for the very early underdrawing in a really finely detailed drawing, but it doesn't suit my technique or my style, so I tend not to work that way. But H drawings are used for drafting and technical drawing and those sorts of things much more. If you want really fine marks, then H pencils are the way to go. Right in the middle, and if you have a stray pencil sitting around your house, it's probably one of these, is the F or the HB line of pencils. The HB would be much more common. When you got a pencil at school, it was probably a HB. And a HB is sort of right in the middle. So HB would be just a little bit harder than the pencil I started this drawing with. So it's a pencil that you can use to start things off. However, it won't necessarily be able to go very dark. The problem with the H pencils is they can't get very dark before you start to damage the paper. And one thing that will happen is the paper will get very hard and shiny, and it won't accept any more layers of graphite over the top. So that's why I try to work very lightly early on. That way I can build up more layers. Now, there's a question about which brand of pencils do I use. These ones, if you can read that, I'm not sure if you can or not. These are the Faber-Castell brand of pencils. I use a lot of Faber-Castell because they're easy for me to get and they're good quality and they're not that expensive. They're okay. So, these pencils are about $3 Australian each. So, in the US, I think the Australian dollar is buying about 73 US cents at the minute. So, probably it's about $2 for you, $2 something. So per pencil, that's not too bad because you get a bit out of a pencil, and if you don't go crazy with it, the pencil will last a little while. I'll tend to go through these softer pencils much faster because they're softer and they wear down quicker. However, a hard pencil, you might be able to use a hard pencil for underdrawings and things like that for a year or more. You might get a lot out of it. The paper is also quite important that you use for your drawing. If you use cheap quality paper, it will tend to be shinier and it won't absorb as much graphite. So you won't be able to get as much out of it. If you buy better quality paper, it will generally be a little bit thicker and a little bit heavier. It will stand up more to the rigors of the drawing process itself, and you'll be able to add more layers. The more layers you can add, the more detail you can add to your drawing. So ultimately, the quality of your materials will matter, but for a beginner, they don't matter so much because you can get enough out of a cheap pencil and a cheap paper if, just to get yourself going and to learn some of the basics. This is just a plain common old visual diary or sketchbook. The paper in it isn't of a particularly excellent quality. It's okay. It's fine just for a sketchbook and for doing sketches, but it's not going to astound you with its depth or its quality. Ultimately, whatever you can afford, that's what you should use. Is my opinion. If you can afford a good quality pencil, well, buy a good quality pencil because it's more enjoyable to work with better quality if you can. But if you don't have a lot of spare money, in most places you can buy some more inexpensive stuff in junk shops or $2 shops or whatever they're called wherever you live. And it's good enough for a start. And I will sometimes even buy that stuff if I want to experiment and muck around with it before committing to an expensive brand. If I just want to test the waters and see, do I actually want to use something or do I want to carry on with it? Now I've got the 6B pencil, I'm going to start building up some of the dark areas. We're going to try to map out the 3D rendering of the head of this koala. So a three-dimensional shape. This one's pretty simple. It's more or less round, but we also have a few protrusions and just different variations in the drawing, which are going to add some interest there, but it's more or less just a ball. So once we work out where the light is coming from, and in this drawing, the light is coming in from this way and shining on the face, leaving more dark areas around the back. Once we understand that, we can start to map some of these areas out and just start to build to some darker tones now. So I'm looking as I do this drawing, where are some of the darkest parts of the drawing? For example, just around the edges of the eyes are quite dark. Even around the edge of the nose and underneath the nose is quite dark. So, and these little corners of the mouth and so on, these are going to be the darkest parts of the drawing. And so I'm going to start building those up dark now because what we're doing is we're working off a scale. If we were to imagine a scale from 0 to 10, and that was all of the different ranges of tone that we have, tone being an area of darkness or lightness, So if you've ever played any music, you'll know that music works to a scale. You'll have a series of notes, and each step is a different note. You go A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And each of the different steps is a different tone. In drawing, it's the same. Each of the different areas of darkness can be a different tone. Only it doesn't have to be a scale of 8 notes. It can be a scale of as many notes as you want. You're only limited by how dark or how light you can get with your drawing materials. So in this case, the lightest thing that I'm going to have is the white of my paper. And so that becomes the lightest note that I can hit in this drawing. The darkest thing that I'm going to be able to do is the darkest mark that I can make with my pencil. And so if I was to use this 6B pencil only, then the darkest mark that I can make with it becomes the other end of the scale. And so everything else in my drawing has to fit in to that scale. And so as I'm doing my drawing, I'm just starting to look at what are the different notes, what are the different tones. If this is going to be really, really dark, we'll mark it in now. And that helps me to evaluate the section next to it. Now I've got some really dark parts here. What about over here? What about over here? These are the things that I'm just looking at all the time as I build up my drawing. And that helps me to be able to get the tone right. So the tone is what will give us our 3D rendering. That's what will make this look like a physical object sitting in a space. Now, depending on the type of art you want to do, that'll depend entirely on whether you need to pay attention to this or not. Some people doing more abstract or decorative or stylistic types of art, like pop art and different things like that, you don't need to care about tone because you're not creating a 3D object. But I think it doesn't hurt to understand it and to be able to use it to build up your own drawings. You know, whether you use a tool or not doesn't matter, but it's great to have tools in your toolbox. We start to build in little bits of detail. That's all we need to do. We don't need to draw every section at once. We don't need to draw in every little element. And I'm not going to go to that level. I don't have time this morning. It certainly takes a long, long time if we wanted to build up a really realistic drawing. I might have to spend a full day or even a day and a half on the drawing. And that's not something that I've got particularly time to do today. But you can always do a drawing in an hour. You can do a drawing in 10 minutes if that's all you've got. It doesn't take long to actually do drawings. Now I've got the shapes here a little bit wrong. I'm just going to move some stuff. And I can see that I've got the shapes wrong because I'm constantly measuring with my eye. Just the different areas, the different elements. I want that about in the middle. And we'll bring this down to it. And then it'll come back up here. And it's all about shapes. A minute ago, it was all about tone, but now it's all about shapes. We've got to work out exactly what are the shapes. And then as we find the shapes, we'll correct them. And it's easy not to be able to see everything at once or in the beginning. Bold with an eraser. Look, I guess I am, but over the years I've also learned that it's like if you're sick, you go to the doctor, don't you? And if the doctor has to perform a procedure, you go with that. You need to get well again. You don't put it off for 5 years wondering if it'll get better by itself. It's the same thing in a drawing. Things won't get better by themselves. And if there's a mistake, you have to fix the mistake. And the sooner you fix the mistake, the easier it is to do that. The sooner you fix your mistakes, the sooner your drawing will look better and you'll feel better. If you put something off to the end of the process, by then it's really going to have a big impact and it's going to be quite difficult. And you're going to feel uncomfortable because it's your drawing. You've just put time and energy into it. You've just put your heart into trying to build this thing. And now you're going to try and rub it out and make it go away. So as soon as you see a problem in your process, that's the time to adjust it, because then it's not a big deal mentally or psychologically. You don't feel bad because you're rubbing out your hard work. You come to recognize that erasing and taking away in order to make it better is a really important part of the process. Now, when we work on the eyes, in particular, I've got to really concentrate here on not covering up the areas where there is white reflected in the eye, because that's an area I need to leave as light as possible. Excuse me. I don't want to be able to get to the end of it and then find that I've put a dark mark where the light areas are going to be. So in my drawing today, and in most drawings where there are eyes, I'm going to make the eye the lightest and the darkest parts of the drawing. That's called contrast, and that's where we get the most contrast, is where your gaze is going to be drawn, or the viewer's gaze is going to be drawn. So we need to put in the darks and the lights around the eyes. And so the more we muddy that area, the more it won't be crisp and clean. And the more crisp and clean we can get it, the more realistic it will look, and the more it will draw the viewer's gaze. So we just draw in those sections. Excuse me. I'll just mute for a moment. Yeah, I'm talking so much that I'm running out of voice. Have I ever discarded a sketch because it's not working out like I hoped? I've stopped working on things that haven't come together for me, but it's something that as I get older in particular, I don't worry too much about whether it's working out or not. I just follow it to its conclusion, because I know that I'm learning from that process. And it's quite common for something not to work out. It's quite common, even after many years of drawing, to try something and it didn't come together how you thought it would. And every time you do something experimental, you're probably going to make mistakes, and you're probably going to run into a problem that you don't know how to solve. And I actually quite like that. I enjoy that process now. So probably when I was younger, I abandoned more things because I didn't know how to progress. I couldn't see a path forwards. And so without knowing what to do, it makes it harder for you to move forward. What's the definition of the finishing point of your drawing is more or less when you don't know any more that you can do with it. Some famous artist once said, and I can't remember which one, but they said that nothing is ever finished. It's simply abandoned. And what usually drives me to stop working on a piece of art is when I can't see a clear path forward anymore. If I can't see what I should do that can possibly make it better. If I'm just taking actions for the sake of taking action, but not because I have a clear plan or a clear path as to why this will improve my drawing. I hope that makes some sort of sense. This shape here isn't quite right, but we can just modify it. It's really easy. Pencils are a pretty good thing for beginners because they're readily available, they're pretty cheap, and you can do a lot with them. I'm going to get pretty dark with this section now. So Once we decide that we're going to get pretty dark, we're more or less committing. We're saying, okay, we're happy and we're just going to progress. I would not be able to erase this fully now that I'm going this dark. But even going dark, I'm not pressing very hard on the paper. And you don't need to press hard on the paper. If you're pressing hard on the paper, you're damaging the paper and you're removing any chance that you might have of being able to further modify the drawing. So just press lightly and just keep building up layers. Just going to look very closely. Each time I want to draw something, I just look and then I draw, and then I look and then I draw again. A trap that people new to drawing or even old to drawing can fall into is you start to assume what's there. But if we want to get some nice realistic rendering on these eyes, I'm quite happy with that shape. I'm going to move it slightly. You'll notice we're not able to erase everything fully now because I've gotten a little bit dark already. But it's okay. It'll still work. You know, in my photo, the koala's not looking directly at the camera, but in my image, I'm going to make the koala look at the viewer. That can be engaging, and that can lead you to look back into the koala's eyes. And that's a little trick that you can use in your portraits. If you want to engage somebody directly, get the subject to look directly at that person. And that can be tricky to do, particularly for beginners, in that it's very easy to have one eye looking in a different direction to the other one. So it's really just a question of taking your time. And that's one of the biggest issues for beginners, is rushing things. It's not a race, and you don't win a prize by getting to the end fastest. Taking your time and stopping and evaluating is really the best way to understand, what are you looking at and how can you use that to create the effect that you're looking to create. So the highlights in the eyes will have a shape. So we'll look for those shapes. The darks in the eyes have a shape, and we look for those shapes. And we're just drawing in shapes. And then we come back to our tone. Where is it on our tonal scale? If we imagine that white is the highest note that we can achieve, and that would be a 10. And the darkest note that we can achieve is the darkest mark we can make with this pencil, and that was a 1. Well, then we start to be able to judge and gauge where these things are. Now, I've been doing this long enough that I don't really sit here and think about it in that term or in that way. And after you've been practicing for a while, you don't have to. But it can be a good way for a beginner just to be able to objectively evaluate what's going on. Now, there's different ways that you can build up the texture of fur. One of the ways you can build it up is just with lots of little marks. Now, because we're using pencil, I'm not going to be able really to cut back in. And a koala's fur is quite short. So the areas where the fur is longer on the koala, we could, for example, draw in some dark section with our nice pencil. We could blend that in. I'll use a tissue just so that the oils of my finger don't get in there. We can blend this section in a bit. Then we can cut back in with the eraser. And this is the trick that I often will use for things with long hair. And you can see now we're starting to build up a bit of a shape of the longer fur in the koala's ear. Then we can come back in with the pencil and we can define it and add a little bit more detail. I'm just doing this quite roughly. I don't have a whole lot of time to build everything up with a lot of finesse, but ultimately These are some techniques that you can use to build this up. And it works with the fur of an animal. It works with the hair of a human being, where you have longer hair. Where you have shorter hair, it takes a lot more building up. Everything has to be built slowly. And that can be something that's difficult for beginners as well, is learning patience. And it was a big challenge for me in my early drawing career, because I didn't have much patience. And I wanted everything to be done now. And I wanted to have a great drawing now. A lot of the time I didn't get a great drawing. What I got was the beginnings of a great drawing, but I didn't have the patience to follow through and get to the end. Building up fur and hair is one of those processes that just takes a long time. There's lots of different techniques that we can use to do this. I'm not going to try to demonstrate them all, but over time we will. We'll do more animal drawings. I asked some guys on Instagram what they wanted to see, and a lot of people are interested in seeing more of the Australian animals that they haven't seen much of. So I'll be drawing some more of those as we go forwards in this little series. If you guys have anything you want to see, let me know in the chat, drop a comment, whatever. Let me know on Instagram. I have a Facebook page, but I'll be honest with you, I hardly ever go there. But you can leave me a comment. I do check it now and then. So I'm just building up little lines. And you might notice that I'm holding the pencil by the end and not by the front. There's a few reasons for that. One reason is, if I put my hand in the way like that, you can't see what I'm doing. But I like to hold the pencil in different ways to be able to make different marks, and it makes it more interesting. When you hold the pencil by the end, you lose that control and that precision, and you're opening yourself up to be able to add more energetic marks. So I don't have perfect control over the marks that I'm making this way. I can slow down and get more control, but it's not control I'm looking for, because there's no control in the way that fur or hair grows. It's not exact, it's not precisely placed. It's all just built up out of lots of little hairs poking in lots of different directions. They might have a lot of similar direction, but they're not all exactly the same. They're not all exactly the same length, or all exactly the same tone. And so I can simulate that in my drawing by making lots of little marks. And that over time, if I can build this up for long enough, will give us strong 3D rendering, and it will give us a lot of energy in our finished drawing, because all of these little lines are building on that. So I'm looking very carefully at my reference photo. And in the future, I'll try to find some software that will allow me to put the reference photo up in the stream. I just have to do a bit of work on that at some point. But what I'm looking for is, I'm just noticing all the different directions that the majority of the fur is running in. And I always do this when I'm drawing animals. Fur will always have a general direction. For example, in this section here, as we move down towards the top of the nose, all around the top of the nose, the fur is pretty much sticking straight up. But as it curves around the side of the nose, a little bit higher, up near the eye, it starts to lean over sideways. Down here past the nose, it's all running in a horizontal manner, just right in this little section. But then as we get further down the face, it starts to turn. And then down the bottom here, it's running and pointing downwards. So just keep looking out for those different directions. The directions that you draw your lines in will matter. And if you just draw everything the same way, it won't look correct. Hello, Clouded Minds. How are you today, mate? Good to see you. We're drawing a koala this morning. I'm just going to add a little bit more darkness here. So in the photograph that I have, the eye on the left is quite strongly in focus, whereas the right side of the koala is a bit more blurry and not in focus. So I'm going to replicate that in my drawing to some extent. I'm going to take more care on the one side and less care on the other side. And that will help me to build that up. I'll get a lot more detail on one side of the drawing, and that will draw your eye, because that's where the sharpness and the detail is. People's eyes are drawn to strong contrast. It could be strong contrast in color. It could be a strong contrast in shapes. For example, let's say I did a drawing with 20 squares and one circle. The thing that will stand out to you is the circle, because it's different. Or I could do a drawing of 20 squares where 19 of them are all one size and the 20th square is massive or very tiny. And again, the odd one out is what you'll stare at, because that's the interesting thing. It's different. You can build a pattern by continuing to repeat the same thing. And that's what we're doing with our fur. We're building patterns. And your eye will interpret that as a pattern. And that will tie this all together. But then we can put contrast in. For example, we have the pattern of all this fur, which now meets this eye, which is a different shape and a different texture. And that creates contrast, which makes you look at that part of the drawing more. These are just little bits and pieces. These are the principles behind which artists have been using for centuries to make their artwork tell you the story that they want to tell you. And ultimately, if you understand some of these principles, you can start to choose the ones you want to apply in your own work. And then you can start to get those same kinds of effects that your favorite artists are getting. You might hit on them occasionally until you learn, but once you actually learn, then you can start to do it deliberately anytime you want. And it's pretty cool. You can get what you want out of your artwork. We're just going to build this area up. I actually can't spend too much longer. I'll spend a few more minutes. I'm going to have to go soon, I'm afraid, guys, but we can probably do another 10 or 15 minutes. So now we need to start focusing in on what's important. One of the benefits to drawing on the clock is it helps to keep you focused on what's important. I haven't been to one for many years, but I used to go to life drawing classes years ago, and it's a great way to help you focus in on those things. Often they will do, say, a 5-minute pose, a 10-minute pose, those sorts of things where you've got 5 minutes to do your drawing. So you really have to focus on capturing exactly what you need, because in 5 minutes it's going to change and you're moving on to the next one. Now we can blend a little bit. There are different ways to blend. We can use the tissue. Some people don't like the feeling of drawing surfaces on their hands, particularly with things like charcoal and pastel, which feel a bit dry, and a lot of the drawing paper will feel a bit rough. And if you can use tissue, you can use blending stumps, you can use paint brushes. Basically anything soft you can use to blend things. Now, I don't have time to sit here and agonize over this anymore, so we're just going to build this up. I'm just looking for the dark areas now. Giving myself free rein for artistic expression in the lines that I'm drawing. Now, there's a few little hairs that stick up here, just like with a cat or a similar other animal. I'm going to put a couple of these in. We're not going to stress too much about it. Now, I'm not going to build up the darks too much because I don't have time to build everything else up. So what I'm going to do is just focus in on just making sure we've got these shapes correct. We add in the tones, and now there's lots of little detail here that we could put in. I'm not going to work on that today. We might do another version another day for a more advanced drawing lesson where we start out with a bit more time. If I do it on a weekend, I can put 3 or 4 hours into it, and we can do a detailed version of one of these drawings too, where I can go into a little bit more depth in my explanations and in my demonstrations. But that won't be today. So we mark in some of those areas, and I don't worry too much about the lines that I'm making. What's important to me at this point is simply getting those areas in. Now, there's a few wrinkles on this nose, but I'm not going to try and draw all those in today. A few little marks here and there. Now let's put a bit more definition into the mouth, because we need more definition into the mouth. The mouth is a bit of a tricky one sometimes, because in animals, often there's hair overhanging the mouth. And so we need to be able to factor that in. Sometimes in humans as well. Hair will overhang and get in the way. And you can get a lot of really cool detail into your drawing by capturing those things. One of the ways that you can do it is putting in a little bit of a mark here. Blend that in. Then we can get our eraser, try to find a corner. I haven't really got a sharp corner, but we can take just some little snips here to overlay those areas that we've just shaded in. And then again, come back with your pencil and just mark it out a little bit. Add a little bit more depth and detail to it. Just overlapping things. So you overlap your lights and your darks. So as I finalize my drawing here, I just want to capture a few little details. I want to finalize some of these little tonal areas. Getting quite dark here because there's quite a dark spot. And this background area here is reasonably dark. If I had more time, I would come back into this with more detail, but I just want to block it in dark now just to help balance the picture. At this stage of the game, we're just looking for balance. We're not necessarily looking for finesse, because you're not going to spend a lot of time staring off at this part of the drawing. You're just going to be aware that there's a dark section there, and that contrasts with this lighter section here. Now, I don't want this to be completely highlighted, so I'm going to add a little bit more darkness here. Good morning, sir. I'm pleased to meet you. I'm going to try your name. I'll probably get it wrong. Giroom. I'm probably saying it all horribly wrong. But anyway, good morning and welcome to my stream. I'm glad to have you here. We're drawing a koala this morning. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I'm just marking out a few more tonal areas here. Now, some people like to turn the page around to get their shading angles correct. I usually just leave it where it is and just turn my arm around, but you can do it any way that suits you. There's no right or wrong to it, and there's no reason why you shouldn't turn the page around. I just tend not to. Now here we've got some sections that appear more white, but they're actually not really white. They're more grey. So I need to knock them back a little bit so that we can help the lightest areas to stand up a little bit more. We put in a little bit of the shading under here. That'll just help us get those shapes in. Koalas are really interesting animals. They sleep a lot. They spend a lot of their time eating and sleeping, basically. They live in gum trees, of course. They only eat the new shoots of the gum trees. So in years of drought, when there's not many new shoots, they don't have a lot to eat. They're unique to Australia, and unfortunately, a lot of their habitat is gone now. There's not as many places for the koalas to live, so they're not that common to see in the wild anymore. When I was younger, it wasn't uncommon to be able to find koalas if you went out in the bush, but they're harder to see now, harder to find. But in more recent years, there's been a lot of effort put into preserving them and helping them have more habitat and more homes. And koalas that have been injured, say in bushfires or by wild animals or other things like that, are often rehabilitated and then re-released. And we seem to be looking after our koalas much better. They're a pretty cool animal, so I think it's worth looking after them. Now, to finalize this little section here, we need to add in some of this depth here. So this will actually make the eye sit back in the face a little bit. So it doesn't just glue onto the very front surface, but it actually sits in there. As we build up this rendering, that's really what we're looking for, is just what do we need to do next? I wish I had another hour. Unfortunately, I don't. That's probably how long it would take me to finish this drawing properly. What I might even do is leave it and come back and finish it on the next session. What do you guys think about that? You want to see a part 2 where we finish drawing the koala? I can build up more detail. We can make it a little bit more of an advanced drawing where I go into some more details on how to do some different things. I think we might have to. I don't really want to leave it there. I mean, we've done a drawing, but I feel like I've only done half the job. So I think I'm going to come back to this one on the next session. Now, I don't know when the next session will be, guys, unfortunately. This weekend might be a bit of a challenge. Otherwise, I would do some on the weekend, but it will probably be early next week, depending on how things work out. However, thank you very much for watching, guys. I've really appreciated your company this morning. Your comments have definitely helped me out. I certainly get sick of talking to myself. So, as always, don't forget to like and do all that sorts of good stuff. And if you know anybody that you think may benefit from these live streams or my other drawing tutorials, don't be afraid to share my work or to give them the link. Thank you very much again. It's been really great to see you. I'll see you next time. We'll finish the koala. Okay, have a great day and bye-bye.